My name is Ralph. I'm working at Luxinnovation, leading the National Competence Center for HPC. So I have the pleasure to moderate the session. So for those who missed the first round with a general introduction, it was recorded, just like this session will be recorded, and we'll put it on our website. So before I introduce our speakers, some words on logistics. We're using InWink, which is this platform, and in the upper right corner you see some buttons, so please don't hesitate to use them to pose any questions you have. As mentioned earlier, the session is recorded and will be available later with the slides at www.research-industry-collaboration.lu. If that was too fast, I'll put the web link in the chat. So even if you haven't done it so far, this is also the platform where you need to place your project outline. If you haven't started it, please bear in mind the deadline for it is 15th of November. It doesn't have to be very verbose, so just a two-pager outlining the project is good enough. That having said, let me introduce you to my fellow speakers. With me are Christian Pauli from the Ministry of Economy and my colleague Max from the RDI department. And Max will be mainly presenting a little bit. Max, handing over to you. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Ralph. Good morning, everyone. Welcome also from my side to our first Q&A session today about the main eligibility criteria and the eligible project costs for the Joint Call HPC. So today's presentation will focus indeed a lot on the interested companies that would like to participate within this second Joint Call HPC. But the session is of course also open to all the interested research organizations. And at the end of the session, you will then also have the possibility to ask all your questions, and we will be happy to answer them as good as possible. So just as a short reminder, you can see here the three organizers of this Joint Call HPC, namely the Ministry of the Economy, the National Research Fund, FNR, and also Luxinnovation. Now, coming to the more interesting elements of the webinar, you can see here on the slide an overview of the main eligibility criteria that the interested companies would need to fulfill within the call. So you can see the dotted box that shows the usual criteria from the standard R&D aid schemes of the ministry. So some of you might already know them from their previous aid applications. In a nutshell, we have here the company's co-funding capacity, the economic impact of the project, the innovation itself, meaning that there should be a new or improved product, process, or service which offers the company a competitive advantage on the market and for which the company needs to overcome some technological challenges. And finally, there are also some additional generic criteria, but I will show you all of these elements in more detail on the following slides. In addition, very specific to the Joint Call HPC, there are also some two additional criteria. So first of all, it is mandatory for all the companies to have a collaboration with at least one eligible public research organization. And second, the project can consist of both industrial research and or experimental development, meaning that the goal of the project could be to create a sustainable knowledge gain within your company, but it could also be to help you develop a new or improved product or service. But as promised, I will go into more detail on the next slides. So one very important criterion is the economic impact of your project. Here, the company needs to demonstrate its economic substance and the positive impact of the project outcome on the future of your company. So therefore, you as the applicant company would need to demonstrate within the aid application that you already have an economic substance in Luxembourg, or that you already have a plan to create this substance during the course of the project. And in addition, your company should also derive an economic benefit from the project results, and you should thus also illustrate how you plan to exploit the results of your HPC project. In addition, the company must then also meet some more generic criteria, with the first one being the so-called incentive effect. This means that the state aid must have a positive effect on the realization of your project, and to respect this criterion, you and your consortium partners would need to await the final funding decision by both the Ministry of the Economy and the FNR before you can then start your project. So we expect the final decision to be taken and communicated in July of next year. In turn, this means, however, also that the company cannot engage into any contracts or legally binding agreements regarding this specific scope for the HPC project before having received the final funding decision. And likewise, there can thus also not be any retroactivity of the already engaged costs for the project. Another generic criterion concerns also the SME analysis, which is used to define the size of the applicant company itself and also the group that it might be part of. This SME analysis is indeed very important because, as I will show you later on, the applicable aid intensities for the companies will depend, amongst others, also on the size of the company and the group that it is part of. So as you can see here on the bottom of the slide, there are some thresholds which are calculated based on the number of employees, your total annual turnover, but also the total balance sheet. And here it's also important to say that these thresholds are not only calculated based on the figures for the applicant company itself, but we would also need to consider the figures for your linked and partner companies. But I will show you the three distinctions on the next slide. So as you can see here, there are in general 3 different categories of companies that we would need to consider for the SME analysis. First of all, a company would be considered as autonomous if it is either completely independent, so without any other participations, or if it has one or more minority partnerships with other companies, but each is less than 25%. In addition, you have also the partner companies, which would be those where the shareholdings rise to at least 25%, but don't exceed the 50% threshold. And finally, the link companies would be those where the holdings exceed the 50% threshold. But to make things a little bit more complicated, it's important to say here as well that these links between companies don't only arise through shareholdings, they can also in theory arise through direct or indirect controls of the majority of voting rights, or also through the ability of a person to exercise a dominant influence. So these links could also arise through one person or a group of physical persons, and that's important to keep in mind. But here, Luxinnovation is of course also available if you have any questions on your specific group structure to help you prepare the organizational chart, but also to help you assess the size of your group. So I already briefly mentioned that how we would calculate the size of your group. So to do so, as I said, it's very important to prepare a very detailed organizational chart of your group that really reflects all the partner and link companies and goes up to the ultimate beneficial owners of your group. And you can see here on the left, for instance, an example where you can see the level of detail that is requested within your phase 1 aid application. Now, to really assess the size of your group, we would consider, first of all, 100% of your FTEs, your turnover, and also the total balance sheet for the applicant company. And in addition, we would also add 100% of these figures for the link companies and the pro rata for your partner companies. But as I said before, if you have any questions on this, you can either already ask it today at the end of the session, or also afterwards, you can reach out to us by email and we can then have a closer look at it together. So in the info session a few weeks ago, Christian already introduced briefly the concept of the undertaking in difficulty. Those companies that would be considered in difficulty are in general also not eligible to state aids, unless here in the call they can also have the possibility to already clearly document how they want to resolve this issue and that they are already in the process of doing so, for instance, through a recapitalization of the company. So in general, an undertaking is considered in difficulty if it has lost more than half of its subscribed share capital, including share premium, through accumulated losses over the years. But this criterion, important to say, does not apply to SMEs, so especially startups that are younger than 3 years. For the larger companies that are interested to apply, there we would also need to check two additional financial ratios based on your last annual accounts. So in order to be eligible, a large company's book debt to equity ratio would need to be smaller than 7.5, and their EBITDA to interest coverage ratio would need to be greater than 1. And here, I would also like to remind you that this criterion needs to be assessed both at the level of the applicant company itself, but also at the group level. Therefore, we would also ask you to submit both the annual accounts of the applicant for 2021 and 2022, but in addition, also the consolidated account of your group. If your group has no consolidated accounts available, this analysis can also be done through a simplified aggregation of the applicant company and the link companies. But again, if you have any question, Luxinnovation can also assist you in calculating these ratios. Now, to illustrate a little bit the theoretical concepts that I just explained, you can see here also an example of such an undertaking difficulty, given that the company has lost more than half of its subscribed share capital and share premium due to accumulated losses. While this example might be somewhat extreme, given that the company has even negative earned funds, it's important to say that a company can only also be slightly in difficulty. Because as you can see here, for the second example, this company seems to do quite well. It has even positive own funds of 5.7 million euro, but it would nevertheless be in difficulty from a state aid perspective, given that it has lost more than half of its subscribed capital over the years. And in both cases, the company would then also need to demonstrate in the aid application of phase 1 that it is already in the process of resolving this issue. So for instance, as I said before, through a recapitalization of the company. Now, you see that all these financial aspects are very important. Therefore, I would also like to take a couple of minutes to go into more detail for the co-funding capacity of the company, which is very important for the later evaluation by the Ministry of the Economy. So the applicant company would here need to demonstrate its viability and its financial soundness regarding its contribution to the project. This means that the company needs to show that it has sufficient financial means to cover its own part of the project costs that will not be co-funded by the ministry. So this co-funding capacity, as you can see on the slide, should be mainly made up of equity, but loans or future free cash flows can also be used as a complement to the equity part. Overall, as you will also see in more detail on the next slides, it's really important during phase 1 to already provide a realistic budget estimation and to clearly document that you have sufficient financial means, that your co-funding capacity is sufficient to cover your project costs. So here just again a short reminder from the information session. You have here the overview of the applicable aid intensities, which depend both on the company's size, but also on the technological complexity of your project. So as you can see, the smaller the company, the higher the aid intensity. And likewise, the more complex your project, the higher the aid intensity. So for industrial research projects that focus on the acquisition of new knowledge, but without any direct commercial application, the aid intensity will thus be higher than for the experimental development projects that already focus on the development of a new or improved product or service. The exact aid intensity of your project will then be defined during phase 2 based on your specific work packages and the specific R&D activities that each of them will target. So therefore, it's also, as I said in the very beginning of today's webinar, possible to have a mix of both industrial research and experimental development. And in the end, the aid intensity will be a mix of the different work packages. So, as I said, during phase one, the companies will need to provide a budget estimation within their project outline on the platform. Therefore, it's important that you already also know about the eligible costs for your aid application within the HPC call. So we have here, first of all, and most importantly, the internal staff costs of the company, which consist of the gross salaries of your internal employees, plus a top-up of 20% to cover your employer's social charges. In addition, you can also include the depreciation costs for your investments and equipment that you will be using during the project, but also the materials and consumables that you will need to realize your project, so the OPEX costs. And in addition, you can also include, or you can partially include, let's say, some external subcontracting costs under the category of special costs. And last but not least, there will also be a 25% top up on the staff costs to cover your additional overheads that will be required to realize the project. Now, as I said, you will need to provide an estimation, but as the name says it, it's an estimation during phase one. So if your project and your consortium will be retained for phase two, you will also have the possibility, of course, to slightly readjust your budget. But as we said, it's nevertheless important to be already as realistic and precise as possible during phase one in view of this co-funding capacity. Now, after having said a lot of things about this co-funding capacity, let me also briefly show you how you should document it within your project outline. So indeed, each company needs to prepare a cash flow forecast. So the smaller companies, the startups, where the applicant is even younger than 3 years, you would need to prepare a detailed cash flow forecast, while the already more established SMEs or even large companies, they can also provide a simplified document with some less details, unless or as long as it's sufficient to really demonstrate your financial situation and your financial projections. You would see on the platform in the attachment section of your project outline, there's also the possibility to download the two templates, so both the simplified and the detailed cash flow. But as always, those are only templates to help you. But if you already have your template or your cash flow prepared in another format, please don't hesitate to share this format with us via the platform. Now, what should you consider when preparing this cash flow? There are a couple of things that you should take into consideration. I would say, first of all, it's important to base your projections on realistic assumptions and to clearly document them within the cash flow to demonstrate that you have sufficient financial means. In addition, your projections should also start no later than November 2023, which is the end of this first phase of the HPC call. And you should also cover a period of at least until 1 year after the project end. Now, to conclude on this co-funding topic, let me just briefly summarize what I explained on the previous slides. And here you also have a sort of a checklist of documents that you would need to prepare during phase one. So for large companies or established SMEs, you would be requested to provide your 2021 and 2022 annual accounts, a simplified cash flow, where you could also indicate any relevant information or documentation of some funds that are not coming directly from your own funds or equity. And as I said before, if your undertaking is in difficulty, you will also need to provide some documentation to show that you are already resolving this issue. So for instance, a recapitalization that you are planning to do within the company. For the startups, the list is actually the same, with the only difference that since your company is younger than 3 years, you would need to prepare a detailed cash flow forecast with more, as the name says it, with more details on your financial projections and where the co-funding capacity should come from. Now, here on the slide, just very briefly, you can find a link to a video that summarizes everything that I said in 20 minutes in about 2 or 3 minutes. So if you have the time, don't hesitate to take a look at the video. Otherwise, as Ralf mentioned in the beginning, you can also find the replay of the Q&A session from today on our platform. We will also share the presentation slides there so that you have all the information available whenever you have the time to have a look at them. And before going on to the Q&A part of the session, let me just also remind you about our next Q&A session that will be on the 7th of November. There we will focus especially on the completeness check of your application. So we will share more information again about the documents that you need to prepare at the end of phase 1. We will also share some tips and tricks about the submission, and probably the most important part, there will again be a Q&A session where you can ask all your questions that you have roughly a week before the submission deadline of phase 1. And with that said, before going on to the Q&A part, just as Ralf mentioned, please don't hesitate to already start your project outline application on the platform so that you can get familiarized with the platform. If you have any questions or IT issues, that you can also have enough time to reach out to us so that we can help you there. And with that said, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I suggest that we move on to the Q&A part. I don't see any questions yet. So either the presentation was very, very clear or very boring.
So crystal clear presentation, I assume.
Otherwise, to give you some additional time to think about some questions or to type your questions into the questions tab, maybe just because we also already received a couple of questions by email that could be of interest to all of you. And we also shared them directly in our FAQ tab on the platform. So I can also add the link here in the chat. We got a question if it's mandatory to have several partners in the consortium. So yes, indeed, there would at least need to be one eligible company and at least one eligible research organization, both coming from Luxembourg. In addition, if you would also like to include some foreign partners into your consortium, that would also be possible, but it's important to keep in mind that these companies or research institutes from abroad are not eligible for funding from neither the Ministry of the Economy nor from the FNR. So they would really need to co-fund or to bring up their own funds to co-fund the project. And in the meantime, I see a first question. Yes, we will share the presentation afterwards. So both the replay and the slides.
And it's all going to be on the website that I shared the link in the discussion forum as well.
Maybe I take the time to reply to another question that we also got via email. That was the question about, is there a specific template that you will need to prepare during phase 1 or phase 2 of the call? So yes, there is. For the first phase, you will have access to this questionnaire completely over the Research Industry Collaboration Platform once you have started your project application and once at least one person from all the partners has validated its participation. For the second phase, then, we will share with the retained consortia a template where all the partners should jointly prepare their application. So first phase, everything will take place over the platform. And for the second phase, it will be a Word document and some additional financial attachments that you will need to prepare. There's another question. If additional partners besides industrial partners can be included. Christian, do you want to take this question?
Hello. Yes, yes, I think you mentioned it already before. So yeah, in principle, other partners are you can include them, and if these partners are from outside the country, then they must be self-funded.
Thank you, Christian. Are there any other questions that you would like to share? Or was it very clear?
Maybe giving people some time to digest what is the best email, the best way to pose questions that come up after the webinar.
Indeed, thanks, Ralf. So if you see here on the slide, our generic email address, contact@research-industry-collaboration.lu, where you can reach out to us. Otherwise, you also find our contact details, I think so, in the feedback email that you will get after the webinar. So if any questions come up afterwards, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're more than happy to help you and assist you where we can. And there's a third question coming up. In case there are multiple companies in the consortium, does one need to take the lead as coordinator? Indeed, a very good question that we also received by email already. So I think that it's not necessary to designate one company as taking the lead in the official documentation. But of course, if it's making your life easier to work together and collaborate, that one is taking the lead, you're completely free to do so. For the official documentation, however, it's not mandatory. Another question that we received, what do you mainly expect to see for the budget items? Are there any exemplary successful or failed proposals that we can refer to? Yes, so maybe I can take this question. So for the budget items, it's really just a short estimation regarding the cost categories that you see here on the slides for the eligible costs. So for each of these categories, you should indicate a rough estimation during phase 1. And as I said before, you will also have the possibility to adjust it afterwards during phase 2 if your project has been retained by the granting authorities. It's really an estimation. Unfortunately, we're not allowed to share previous aid applications with other companies or research institutes, as these are confidential documents. Another question regarding the HPC costs. Should these costs be included both for the company and the research institute budget? And do we need to have the HPC partner like Meluxina at the first phase?
I can take that question. I think the one that in the end also takes over the costs should include them into its budget. So it shouldn't be split over the two partners, but really be dedicated to the one that in the end will also have the costs. I think the second part is, do we need to have the HPC like Meluxina at the first place? So in the end, it's up to you which partner or HPC structure you want But of course, I think we highly recommend also to use the structures that we have here in Luxembourg. But it's not mandatory.
Thank you, Christian. And maybe a question that seems to be quite related to what you just said. You mentioned that the subcontracting services on the eligible costs are those, should those services also come from Luxembourg only, or could they also come from somewhere else? Do you want to take that question as well, maybe?
Yes, I can take that as well. So it's related, and the answer is the same. Of course, you can also take services from abroad, but if you have the possibility to have a Luxembourgish company or service, we highly recommend to use that one, because our mission in the end is to create some substance here in Luxembourg. Yeah, we are more than happy to see if there can be some collaborations or services used here. Maybe I can also take the next one. Are the terms accidental development and industrial research formally defined? Yes, they are. So in the call text, you will find a clear definition of these two categories, and those are based on European state aid regulation, so they are clearly defined.
Thank you, Christian. I also just added the call text or the link to the call text here in the chat in the discussion tab. So if you want to take another look at the call text, you can find the link there. Yeah, I think that we covered all the questions that we got so far. Maybe some people are still typing their questions. Otherwise, as we said, of course, we are always there to help you also after the webinar. And it's sufficient to just send an email and we will help you. If there are no other questions, maybe I would suggest that we close today's session. And I would like to thank you again all for your participation, and then hope to see you latest on the 7th of November for our next Q&A session before the phase 1 submission deadline.
Yes, so eagerly looking forward to interesting project. Huh?
Yes, same from our side. Thank you.
See you on the 7th of November then, and if
Yeah.
you have any questions in between, don't hesitate to ping us. All right.
Goodbye.